Please welcome her.
It is just so fun to be back. I think it's even more fun to be here the second time because that means that I didn't screw it up too bad the first time. Thank you. I can't thank you all enough, all the ladies who put so much work into making this happen, because this is such a beautiful event to come to look around the room, to see so many women who have made time in their busy day and to enjoy the beautiful gift of friendship. And it was so neat to have Heidi share, even impromptu, because that's pretty much what I'm going to speak to tonight, is how God uses our friendships in such a profound and meaningful way and can work all of his good things in our lives through those friends. So I have been in a season of growth for the last year, and when Kristen called me in August and said, we're putting together our fall lineup, would you like to come talk? I said, you know, I would, but God hasn't quite finished the end of what I need to share. So you need to put me not in September or October, but maybe November. Because of course I was giving God a timeline at that moment, like, hey, we gotta have this wrapped up, like I gotta give a talk. And he's faithful, praise God. So part of what I have learned is gonna come across as super wise. We've been talking about being wise. I turned 40 this summer, which means I am now wise. Yes? Where are my other wise friends? Yeah? Because that's what 40 is all about, right? And here it is. Here's this profound wisdom. Marriage is hard. And I am just done being in denial about it. Like, why did I think that it wasn't going to be hard? Why did I have that dream in my head, that strange hallucination that I was just going to arrive, right? At some point after year 14 or 15 or 16 of marriage, it was just gonna like, boom, like this is a piece of cake. I got this figured out. Yeah, no, that is not the way this works, okay? So there's my first piece of wisdom. Of course, you have probably been married long enough to have learned a couple of things yourself. Number one, you and your husband do not agree on everything. Again, real wisdom here, ladies. You can take notes if you need to. And number two, you cannot change the man you married. Okay? Very, very, very basic here. And Kristen's like, really, Beth? 18 years, that's all you got? So we all know that there's times in your marriage where you have to figure out how to get along, how to work through a disagreement. And when you're first married and you're working through how to work through your finances together, what are our priorities on spending? That's a really hard thing to work through. And then maybe you have kids and you have to figure out how you're going to parent and how you're going to raise those kids. And that's a really hard thing too. But there's also these other things in our marriage. And I'm going to use the word things because the thing that I have worked through isn't actually that important, okay? It's what it generated in my heart that was really, really important. And so I'm going to continue to refer to this thing. I'm going to give you some examples because I hope that you will have a little bit of time to reflect about what one of these things might be for you. I polled some of my friends. Now, maybe your husband is really into athletics and he has decided he needs to train for a triathlon. Maybe your husband is really into his home video and tech stuff, he just really, really enjoys that. Maybe your husband is, he spends a lot of time and money hunting or fishing, right? It's a big thing here in Montana. Or maybe your husband has this really crazy idea about starting a business. The thing isn't bad, right? It's not a bad thing for our husbands to have those interests and those desires and those dreams. And this thing, because it's not bad, it starts out small, it's part of marriage, but then you find yourself getting kind of irritated about the thing. But then, there's good days and sometimes you don't even think about it. But then there's a big trip, or then there's a big purchase, or a bigger commitment. And all of a sudden, this thing is really starting to bother you, right? But then, of course, you have that conversation with yourself that, my husband's so great, he's such a good dad, and he works so hard for our family. And he was happy to stay home with the kids when I wanted to go to that Words for Wives thing. So I just need to, just whatever, it's just a thing, it's fine. A little further down the road, a couple weeks, couple months later, and you turn this corner and this thing is just rubbing on your heart over and over and over. And that rubbing creates a callus, a little place on your heart that just isn't very soft anymore. And you know it's there, but you're so busy. right? You've got laundry to fold, and carpool to run, and dishes to wash, and diapers to change. And so this thing that's rubbing on your heart, you just ignore it because you're busy and you don't have time for that. Ain't nobody got time for that, right? So this callous spark, but then it starts to spread and it starts to grow. And it's fed every time you think about that thing and you let that bitterness and resentment make that callus spread. And then it's like you didn't even really know what was happening, but all of a sudden your heart is hard and you are not in a good place. And you find yourself being able to answer yes to some of these questions. Do you focus on your husband's defects rather than his strengths? Do you dwell on how your husband isn't meeting your needs? Do you read articles or books about marriage and think, my husband really needs to read this? Do you think your husband is getting the better end of the deal in this marriage? Do you compare your husband unfavorably to other men? And ladies, those are hard questions. And those are questions that a few short months ago I was in a place where I was answering yes to every single one of those. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 6, we read, "Love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. And your reward will be great, and you'll be children of the Most High, for He is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful." I had read this passage before, but not in the context of marriage. As my heart had hardened, though, I realized I was treating my husband as my adversary. I was looking at my marriage as a zero-sum game in which there was one winner and one loser, and I was keeping score, and I was pretty convinced I wasn't going to be on the losing side. I was certainly not doing things or doing good and expecting nothing in return. Jesus tells us to love our enemies, and it was a proverbial slap upside the head when I realized I was treating my husband as my enemy. I had never labeled my husband as my enemy. I had never gone to coffee with a girlfriend and said, the strangest thing happened. I woke up this morning and realized I was sleeping with the enemy. Never had that moment. But this thing crept in, and I used it as an excuse to treat my husband as my enemy. I had built up a strong and detailed argument as to why I was right and he was wrong. I had kept a long list of the ways that I had been so supportive of this thing. I had allowed my mind to dwell on thoughts that eroded my love and respect for my husband. And there I was, at the edge of the cliff, looking down into that deep, dark, ugly abyss of where the next step would take me. I am just so convinced, ladies, that this is how the evil one destroys so many marriages today. That it is this quiet, cunning hardening of our hearts that set our hearts against our husbands by tempting us to dwell on those things that divide our union and cause us to treat our husband as our enemy. One of my favorite passages is Lamentations 3:22. "Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for His compassions never fail, and they are new every morning." So just a few short months ago, this was real. His compassion surrounded me, and it was unfailing, and I was not consumed by the bitterness and the resentment that had taken up residence in my heart and made it hard. Looking over the last year, I see many, many ways that God was so faithful and so caring and kind to reach down and help me where I was. But I wanted specifically to encourage you with one of those things tonight, in the ways that He worked in my marriage through my friendships. And I ran out of adjectives because I cannot even describe to you how crazy blessed I am by the women in my life. And I am going to just keep reading, otherwise I'm going to start crying, because many of them are here because they love me. These are ladies who know my story. They listen to me, they cry with me, they pray for me. They love me so much more deeply than I deserve. And I like to think of these friendships as scaffolding. Okay, so my husband and I lived in Europe early on in our marriage, and we loved all the opportunities to travel. And we would go to a country, and it'd be like, oh, look, Big Ben, behind the scaffolding. You know, and then you'd go to Italy, and they're like, oh, the Leaning Tower of Pisa, surrounded by scaffolding. And you know, so on and so on, right? It seemed that every time we got someplace and we were ready to take that awesome Christmas card photo op, that it was just a whole bunch of scaffolding, okay? So scaffolding is, it's an external support. It's like an exoskeleton, right? So these beautiful, famous, incredible landmarks, they're old and they need to be, you know, they didn't have renovations done or repainted or new plumbing, I don't know. But anyway, there's always a reason that these things are surrounded by scaffolding. Okay, so we all have a picture? Yeah? Okay. I have found, especially in the course of the last year, that this is what our friendships are to our marriage, okay? Our marriages, just like those famous buildings, are worth preserving, right? And anything worth preserving needs to be occasionally repaired or restored, or sometimes even have a renovation done. And so I'm convinced that it's absolutely vital for us to build that type of support around our marriages. Building that kind of support requires some thoughtful questions, right? I mean, I hope that many of us here tonight are with friends. So this is for both of you, because we both want to have that friend and to be that friend, okay? One of my dear friends would ask me, how is your heart towards Andy? And that was a really good and intentional type of question, because I couldn't just blow it off and say, oh, fine, you know, whatever. And then she would sit, and she would wait, and she would smile, until I finally had kind of worked through in my head, really, where am I? Where is my heart in this? Some other really helpful questions are, what are you struggling with most in this situation? How are you going to navigate that discussion? Where do you see God at work in this situation? When can you and your husband set aside time to have that talk? How might you be able to change your perspective about what's happening? And what outcome are you praying for? All of these questions, and of course coming from somebody who knows me and loves me and cares for me and is willing to listen to me, were the work of God in my heart, the work of processing through the things I've been feeling and coming to a place that was way better, thank goodness. And like I said, these aren't just questions that it should come from both of you, right? When you find that lady and it can be 1 or 2 or 3 or 5, you know, God is a big God with a lot of wonderful blessings and a lot of wonderful friends here, right? Ready, prepared for you. Just like Heidi said, he's gone before you to plant these blessings in your life. So this friendship, it should be different than the friend that maybe you just meet at the gym or that you just have a very casual relationship with, right? It should be different than a friend who just listens to when you're complaining and says, oh yeah, he's the worst, right? Okay, that's not building scaffolding, okay? It should be a woman who is going to come alongside you and fight for your marriage, okay? Somebody who cares so deeply about you that they will be honest with you, right? And that they will point you back to the gospel and to what God would have for you. Forming this kind of trust, of course, takes a lot of time. And I'm increasingly convinced that the busyness of our lives has crowded out the time that we think that we would have spent investing in these friendships. And I had to erase some of the words I wanted to use right here. I think it is so important that we push some other things out of our schedule that might be good, but you have to make time for that, because these relationships don't just you know, float across your Facebook feed, right? These kinds of questions aren't ones you can throw out over Twitter. Okay, it takes time, and it's so worth it. It's so important to do, so important. I think we're called to these types of friendships because they're essential to our marriages, they're essential to our parenting, they're essential to our spiritual well-being, they're essential to our understanding of a God who's our friend, who calls himself our friend, right? I should skip that line. I think it's just, I literally, like, sentences about how important this is, because I couldn't think of it. Anybody else got some words? Like, vital, essential, critical, important. I used all the synonyms in my word processing machine, right? Struggling here, so I'm just gonna wrap up. My prayer is that you would leave here tonight with just a renewed sense of how much God wants you to find that friend, how much He wants to use that person in your life to support and protect your marriage, how much He wants that for you. I hope and pray that each one of you have had a friend, and you can sit here right now and think about the ways they've enriched your life and the way that they have spoken honesty and truth and love, and how that makes us feel that we're seen and known, right? And it's so worth the time. It's so worth the one other thing you think you can't say no to, but you actually secretly want to say no to. And then you can say no to it because you know you're saying something yes to better, something better, right? Building that friendship. And it's not only an investment in the friendship that of course is so sweet and beautiful, but it's an investment in your marriage, all right? Take time to build that scaffolding around your marriage. I hope that you will leave here tonight with somebody on your heart that you can call and ask to go for a walk or to grab a cup of coffee or a bite to eat, and you can have a renewed sense of the importance of investing in that relationship and in building her up, and in doing so, protecting your marriage. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. For more, please visit encouragesquad.com or follow us on Instagram or Facebook.